Okay, well, let's get started. Here as we go through the round one analysis and start to kick off round two. Okay, this is what the afternoon looks like. We're going to hear a little story and then go through the project objectives just to set us back to where we and why we started out. We'll go through some of the round one findings that the project team came across in the data, and then a little bit of the reflections. I'm going to give you a chance to reflect yourselves and make some sense out of the stories that we heard or that have been submitted, and then we'll go through the next steps. So first of all, though, I do, on behalf of the project team and all the partner organizations, want to say thank you. Give yourselves a big hand. We had a great first round and really getting things started well. We appreciate the time you took to tell all your stories. We recognize the effort that you put in and day out. We really want to celebrate the passion you put into helping people navigate their way through their unique journeys. So when the partners got together to launch the project, we had 4 key objectives in mind. 1 was to recognize you and your work. 2 was to better understand your experiences. We hear about the changing needs of clients, but we want to dig deeper and straight from the source. 3, we need to see if we should tweak our service design. So as you develop relationships with your clients and work to address the challenges they face, it's likely that you're doing things that aren't part of a script. You're navigating unique situations in creative ways. So we ask ourselves, is there a best practices model hidden in your stories that can accelerate our learning so that we can adapt quicker, including how we can work together across organizations? And 4, we want the project to provide a way to share information with each other. What we've done to meet these objectives then is to develop a story collector tool so that you can share your stories of challenges and successes about your client's journey. Your stories are absolutely essential to this process. You are the common thread as clients progress through the system, and you have established relationships with your clients, so you truly know and can articulate the stories. We can then pull out the themes from the collection of stories to identify gaps and develop these best practices to better help our clients experience success. So how's it different? Well, there are a few ways in which this project is different from similar exercises that you may have done in the past. First, we're deliberately sharing experiences across organizations and collecting stories in a formal way. We often share stories at the water cooler or at a team meeting, but we don't always hang on to them. And second, I believe it's the first time we're documenting our efforts so that we can get to the essence of what you do, so that we can take these human-centered stories and see what works and what doesn't work throughout a collection of stories rather than just in a single story. We haven't collected stories of this magnitude before or analyzed them across all these stories or across our organizations, which this will allow us to adapt our service delivery to meet these changing needs. We're using a unique tool to give us a deeper understanding of emerging themes across multiple stories. So it's a great opportunity to be creative in how we go about improving the things we do. So the project team met and ran through a similar exercise to the one we're going to work through today. I'm not going to share a whole lot of our conversation because I don't want to bias the conversations you'll be having with each other. But at a high level, I can tell you this: the better the data we collect, the more effective the changes we can make. The more stories we collect, then the better the data will be and the more robust the themes that will emerge. So in a nutshell, we need more stories. The collection tool we're using, SenseMaker, is designed to work with a large number of stories. And the method we've chosen, and that's to run multiple collection rounds over time, is really how we're going to increase the number of stories that we have to work with. So we collected a total of 75 stories, which is great. And it gives us a target to beat in round 2. We had a pretty good distribution of stories across all 3 organizations, about 39% of them from Human Services at the county, 27% from CES, and 32% from the Tilsonburg Multi-Service Center. And to put it into perspective, it's really close to the relative percentage of how many participants we have. So it's a really good representative sample. To the question, my story makes me feel, you feel that 83% of the stories you give give you a positive feeling, such as happy, proud, hopeful. And then about 17% of the stories give you more of a negative feeling, such as sad, worried, or stressed. And this is where I find I really like how SenseMaker works, or the tool that we're using, because after you've told your story, you do your own evaluation of that story based on the dyads, the triads, the multiple choice questions. Oftentimes, and I think I mentioned this in the introductory session, it'll be the researchers that do that sort of work after to try and pull that meaning out. But in this case, you did it. So I find that just adds a really tight level of authenticity to what the results are we're seeing on the screen. My story mainly involves, well, about half of the stories, 46% involve a job seeker. My story illustrates a situation that, so here you indicated that the stories span this entire spectrum from situations that we normally deal with all the way over to situations that are completely different than what we're used to. You'll see on the slide there, the dotted line represents the median, which means half of the responses sit on either side of that line. And you can see here that the stories you told lean towards situations that you normally deal with. You also indicated a strong feeling that whatever happened in your story should happen a lot more. You can see with this one, same as with the previous slide, that we have situations that expand this entire spectrum from should never happen again to should happen a lot more. This time with a significant portion that should happen a lot more. You may have heard this expression before, data rich, information poor. It was first used in 1983, a best-selling business book called In Search of Excellence. And it was used to describe organizations having a lot of data, but lacking the processes to produce meaningful information and create a competitive advantage. So even though the concept comes from a business book, I find that governments are pretty guilty of this as well. And although some have invested in turning data into meaningful information, we're generally slow to catch on. And the graphs I showed you on the previous slides and in the way that I showed them to you is really typical of how data is commonly shown. They're descriptive of what happened, of how you responded to the questions, but in themselves, they don't provide further insight. SenseMaker allows us to look at the stories behind these graphs and to go to the detail, in fact, behind each bar in a graph. So with the dashboard that we have, we can click on the bars in the graph and the story pack, which is the collection of stories related to those bars, which you consider to be a certain type. And in this case, you see on the screen, stories that lean towards being completely different than what you're used to. So it might be a little hard to see on the screen, but the total number of stories collected that responded to this question was 74. But as I selected those 4 bars that I've circled there and they turned a darker green, the number updated to 16 because within those bars, 16 stories were classified as that along that spectrum. And then you can see correspondingly to the right, that there are now a story pack of 16 stories rather than 74. So it lets us look specifically at, okay, what was really completely different way on that spectrum, but then also to jump back, we can look at the data from a numbers perspective, hop on over to see what the qualitative, human-centered, heartfelt story is, but then also jump back to look at another aspect. So this is an example of how SenseMaker allows us to do that with one question. But we're going to go even deeper, gaining more insight from what are called XY density graphs or density plots. So what a density plot allows us to do is look at 2 questions at the same time to learn more about how the different variables in your stories interact. In the plot you see on the screen, we're looking at 2 questions simultaneously. One, my story illustrates a situation that we usually deal with or is completely different than what we are used to. And the second question is, my story shows something that should never happen again or should happen a lot more. What this does is help us to hone in on what's happening across the stories you shared. So for instance, there are 11 stories that you said you usually deal with, but you feel should never happen again. Or if we look at the other area on the graph in the upper right, we see that there are 13 stories that are completely different than what you're used to, but you feel should happen a whole lot more. So now we're starting to get into this deeper understanding of what's really happening across your stories. What we can do now is go back to the 11 stories or the 13 stories and look at what the common themes are, what's really happening at that human level. And you're going to get a chance to look for themes yourself in a few minutes. Here's another example that we looked at. One, the first question was, what I did in my story is in line with or beyond my job expectations? And two, then the second question was, to get my job done, I complied to or had to bend the rules and be creative. And we can see here on this plot that there are 11 stories to the bottom right in the graph that you said are in line with your job expectations, but you had to be creative to bend the rules. Looking at the top right area of the graph, there are 20 stories where you had to bend the rules and be creative, excuse me, that you feel are beyond your job description, or sorry, job expectations. Okay, so what's coming up next? Well, as you can see here, we've come a bit of a ways now. We started this journey around March 18th and 19th with the introductory sessions. We let the stories collection period run for quite a while. Then we did some analysis, and the project team had their own workshop with the designers to show us how to look at the data. Now we're having today's sessions, the 20th and 21st. And then the round 2 story collection essentially begins on Monday. I figure everybody's looking forward to the long weekend. We can start when we get back. And that'll run till about June 11th, at which point we'll take another, we'll extract all the stories that have come in that time and do another round of what we just did now. That said, it's an ongoing process. You can enter in a story at any time. As we head into the second round of journaling, I just want to reiterate that it's not an outing exercise. Individual stories remain anonymous unless you choose to share them, which I would say was really good, that when we looked at the question of who to share this with, almost every story was to be shared, a lot of them to the wider public. There is no right or wrong answer. We're looking for authentic stories, so you don't need to feel like you need to share one just for the sake of telling one. And they don't have to have a fairy tale ending. So for round 2, we're going to focus the prompt question a bit to see what you can share about communicating and working with each other to help clients. So this came up in the recommendations you made during round 1 and in quite a few of the stories. So this time, you'll see the following prompt when you go to the collector landing page. Share a recent positive or negative experience where you worked with or communicated with colleagues in order to help a client. It can be colleagues within your organization or another organization that you work with. And describe in detail what happened and why you find it memorable. Keep in mind that you can share any story. It's not limited to a story about communication and working with your colleagues. So don't hesitate to share any memorable, positive or negative moment. The more stories we have, the better we'll be able to pull out the themes and really make change. But as we continue to document these stories throughout the year, we're going to prompt probably each round with different aspects of your work, just so that you have something to focus on and make, spark those creative juices and memories of other stories or specific ones. So as before, with the first round, you can access the journaling tool through the CES project page, which is www.cesoxford.ca/umbrella stories. And once you're there, you'll see that blue box that says, what's your umbrella story? And that's a clickable link that will take you to the collector site, which you'll recognize looks like this. And that ends our session for today. I want to thank you all for tuning in. It's been a great couple sessions, and enjoy the long weekend.